She disappeared with $80,000 of our savings, leaving a note saying that she needed to find herself. For 12 months, I heard absolutely nothing. I was dead to her. Then, out of the blue, my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood run cold. It read, "I have had my fun. Now I am ready to be a wife again." She actually thought she could just walk back through the front door like nothing happened. She had no idea that the locks had been changed, the bank accounts were frozen, and the man she left behind did not exist anymore. My name is Mark, and up until last year, I was the picture of the American dream. I am 50 years old. I own a chain of 5 premium auto detailing centers in the suburbs of Chicago, and I thought I had a rock-solid marriage. My wife, Linda, was a high-performing real estate agent. We had 2 grown kids, a nice house, and a routine that felt unbreakable. I was the steady one, the provider who made sure the bills were paid and the cars were running. Linda was the social butterfly, always networking, always closing deals. I never questioned her late nights or the smell of expensive wine on her breath. I trusted her implicitly. That was my first mistake. It happened on a gray Tuesday in March. I came home early to find the house echoing with silence. There was no greeting, no sound of the TV, just a single piece of paper sitting on the granite kitchen island next to the coffee maker. 7 words. I need to find myself. Don't wait. That was it. No tearful conversation, no counseling, just a cowardly exit. I went upstairs and found half her closet empty. Then I checked the safe in the master bedroom. It was drilled open. Empty. I pulled up our joint bank accounts on my phone. The checking account was drained. The savings account, which held our emergency fund and the capital for my next business expansion, was lighter by $80,000. She had not just left me, she had robbed me. Most men would have collapsed. They would have called her phone 100 times, begging for an explanation. I did call her exactly once. It went to voicemail. I did not leave a message. Instead, I called the bank and froze every remaining shared asset. Then I called the police to file a report for theft. They told me it was a civil matter between spouses, which I expected, but I wanted the paper trail. I wanted it on record that on this date, Linda abandoned the marriage and took marital funds. I was not going to be the victim who waited by the window. I was the man preparing for war. The second blow came from my children. I called my son, Tyler, and my daughter, Madison, to tell them their mother had left. I expected shock or confusion. Instead, I got silence. Tyler, who was 27, got defensive immediately. He told me that mom was just going through something and that I needed to give her space. He sounded like he was reading from a script. I pressed him, asking if he knew where she was. He avoided the question. That is when I knew. They were not just protecting her, they were in on it. Later, I would find out they were actually sending her money, funding her midlife crisis while I was back home trying to keep the business from stalling. I did not scream at them. I simply told them that since they were adults who could fund a runaway, they could fund themselves. I cut them off from the family phone plan and insurance the next morning. For 3 months, I worked like a dog. I threw myself into the detailing centers, expanding our services, checking every receipt, and maximizing profit. I replaced the silence in the house with the noise of productivity. I fixed the fence, repainted the garage, and manicured the lawn until it looked like a golf course. I was angry, yes, but I channeled that fury into building an armor around my life. I stopped looking at photos of Linda. I put them all in a box and shoved it in the attic. I was moving forward, fueled by pure spite and caffeine. That is when I met Sarah. She had moved into the rental property across the street around late May. I had seen her coming and going in scrubs, driving a beat-up Honda, looking like she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. We exchanged nods, nothing more. Then, one Saturday, I was under the hood of my truck, wrestling with a stubborn alternator. I heard footsteps and looked up to see her standing there with a 6-pack of craft beer. She told me I looked like I needed a cold one more than I needed a mechanic. We sat on my tailgate and drank the beer in the afternoon sun. She was direct, which I liked. She told me her name was Sarah, she was an ICU nurse, and she had seen me working on the house like a man possessed for weeks. I told her I was working out some demons. She did not pry. She just nodded and said that demons usually required harder work than drywalling. We started talking, really talking. I told her the short version. Wife left, took the cash, kids took her side. I expected pity. Sarah just looked at me and said that trash usually takes itself out, but it hurts when it steals your wallet on the way to the curb. I laughed for the first time in months. A few weeks later, I was over at her place for coffee. She made it strong, black, no sugar. We were sitting in her kitchen when she dropped the first bombshell. She looked at me over her mug and told me that she knew who I was before she moved in. My stomach tightened. I asked her how. She told me she had been a palliative care nurse 3 years ago at a different hospital. She took care of my brother, David, in his final weeks fighting cancer. The room went silent. I remembered those weeks. They were the hardest of my life, sitting by David's bedside, watching him fade. Sarah told me she remembered me because I was the only one who came every single day. She said she saw how I advocated for him, how I sat with him when he was scared, and how I handled the end with dignity. She told me that she moved into this neighborhood, saw me, and realized I was the same man. She said she did not say anything earlier because she did not want to bring up painful memories, but she wanted me to know that she knew the quality of man I was, regardless of what my ex-wife or kids thought. That moment changed everything. It was not just attraction anymore. It was respect. We started spending every free moment together. It was easy. It was quiet. It was real. By September, Sarah had practically moved in. We were building something solid, something based on honesty and shared values, not just social climbing and appearances. I was happy. For the first time in 20 years, I was genuinely happy. Then came the Tuesday night in late September. We were in the kitchen making dinner. I was chopping vegetables. Sarah was searing steaks. It was domestic and peaceful. My phone was sitting on the counter. It buzzed. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. It was an unknown number, but the area code was familiar. I opened the message. I have had my fun. Now I am ready to be a wife again. Can we talk? I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. No apology. No explanation for the $80,000. Just a statement that her vacation from our marriage was over and she was ready to resume her role. She thought I was a pause button she could just press whenever she felt like it. I showed the phone to Sarah. She read it, and her face went hard. She asked me what I was going to do. I looked at Sarah, then back at the phone. I felt zero urge to reply. I felt zero urge to ask where she had been. The only thing I felt was the cold, hard realization that Linda was about to find out exactly how much things had changed. I told Sarah I was not going to reply. I told her that if Linda wanted to talk, she could talk to a lawyer. But Linda was not the type to take silence for an answer. 2 days later, the texts escalated. She started begging. She said she made a mistake. She said she was lost. Then she dropped the card she thought would win the game. She texted that the kids missed us being a family. That made me see red. She was weaponizing the children she had turned against me. I decided right then that I was not just going to divorce her. I was going to destroy her narrative. I called a high-powered divorce attorney the next morning. I told him everything. The abandonment, the theft, the kids' involvement. He told me to hire a private investigator immediately to find out what fun she had been having for the last year. He said if we could prove adultery, coupled with the financial theft and abandonment, we could crush her in court. I hired the investigator that afternoon. 3 days later, I got the preliminary report. It was thick, and it was damning. Linda hadn't just gone to find herself. She had gone to find a 28-year-old fitness instructor in Miami. The $80,000? That was his seed money for a gym that never opened. She had blown our life savings on a boy toy who dumped her the second the cash ran out. Now she was broke, alone, and coming back to her safety net. But she didn't know that the safety net was gone, and the man she left was holding a dossier of evidence that would leave her with absolutely nothing. I was standing in my driveway, holding the report, when a silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb. My son, Tyler, jumped out. He looked furious. He stormed up the driveway, pointing a finger at me. He shouted that I needed to stop being stubborn and answer Mom's calls. He said she was crying, that she was sorry, and that I was being cruel. He didn't see Sarah step out onto the porch behind me. He didn't see the cold look in my eyes. He just saw the dad he thought he could push around. I folded the report and looked at my son. I asked him if he knew about the fitness instructor in Miami. Tyler's face went pale. He stopped mid-sentence. That is when I knew the second twist. My kids didn't just know she left. They knew about the affair too. They had lied to my face for a year, protecting her infidelity while watching me mourn my marriage. Get off my property, I said. My voice was low, dangerous. Tyler tried to stammer an excuse, but I stepped forward. I told him that if he did not leave in 10 seconds, I would have him arrested for trespassing. He saw something in my face he had never seen before. He turned around, got in his car, and sped off. I turned to Sarah. She looked shaken but resolved. I told her the war had just started. She took my hand and said she was ready, but we had no idea how desperate Linda was about to get. Because the next morning, she didn't text. She showed up, and she wasn't alone. She had brought a moving crew. That was the level of delusion I was dealing with. A 20-foot box truck was idling at the curb, blocking my mailbox, with two guys in coveralls standing by the back ramp, looking bored and waiting for instructions. And standing next to the passenger door of her silver Mercedes was Linda, looking like she had just stepped out of a salon, and my daughter, Madison. Seeing Madison, there was a gut punch I had not expected. Tyler had been the scout, sent to test my defenses, but Madison was the emotional artillery. She was the one I had always had a soft spot for, the one who used to call me her hero. Now, she was standing shoulder to shoulder with the woman who had nuked our family, looking at me with a mixture of defiance and pity. I did not open the front door. Instead, I walked out through the garage, pressing the button to close the heavy door behind me. I wanted a physical barrier between my sanctuary and their circus. I stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, staring them down. The morning air was crisp, but the heat radiating off my ex-wife could have melted the asphalt. She smiled when she saw me, a tight, rehearsed expression that did not reach her eyes. She started walking toward me with her arms open, as if she were returning from a long business trip rather than a year-long abandonment. She actually thought she could hug me. She thought she could wrap her arms around me and erase 12 months of silence and $80,000 of theft with a whiff of her expensive perfume. I held up a hand, palm out, stopping her in her tracks about 10 feet away. I told the movers to stay where they were. I spoke clearly and loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. I announced that this was private property, that no one had permission to enter, and that if they attempted to unload a single box, I would call the police and file charges for trespassing. The movers looked at each other, then at Linda. They stopped moving. They knew a domestic dispute when they saw one, and they were paid by the hour, not by the drama. Linda dropped her arms, her smile faltering. She tried to use her reasonable voice, the one she used to close real estate deals. She told me to stop being dramatic. She said that she had come home to work things out, that she was ready to be a family again, and that I was embarrassing us in front of the neighborhood. She gestured to Madison, saying that our daughter had taken time off work to help her move back in because they all agreed it was time to heal. She framed her return as a gift to me, an act of benevolence. I looked at Madison. I asked her if she knew about the $80,000. I asked her if she knew that her mother had drained the savings account that was meant to help pay for her future wedding. Madison flinched. She looked down at her shoes. She knew. They all knew. That silence told me everything. Madison had chosen her side. She was not there to mediate. She was there to enable. She started to mumble something about mom being lonely and needing support, but I cut her off. I told her that theft was not a cry for help. It was a crime. Then came the first twist. Linda took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. She dropped the sweet act. She told me that legally, this was still her house. She said that Illinois was a marital property state, that her name was on the deed, and that I could not stop her from entering her own home. She said she had consulted a lawyer who told her that until a divorce decree was signed, she had every right to sleep in her own bed. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. She smirked, thinking she had checkmated me. She thought nothing had changed. She marched toward the front door, confident and arrogant. I did not move to stop her physically. I just watched. She jammed the key into the lock and twisted. It did not turn. She tried again, harder. Nothing. She jiggled the handle, frustration rising in her posture. I had changed every lock on the property the day after the bank account hit zero. I had installed a commercial-grade security system with cameras that were currently recording her meltdown. I told her that she could try all day, but that key belonged to a life she had forfeited. That is when the front door opened from the inside. It was not me. I was still standing in the driveway. It was Sarah. She stepped out onto the porch, holding a mug of coffee, wearing one of my old flannel shirts and a pair of leggings. She looked calm, grounded, and utterly at home. The silence that fell over the driveway was absolute. Linda froze. Her eyes went wide, scanning Sarah from head to toe. She saw the comfort, the familiarity, the way Sarah stood on that porch like she owned the place. This was not some fling I was hiding in the shadows. This was a woman who had taken her place at the head of the table. Linda's face turned a color I had never seen before, a mix of ghost white and rage red. She shrieked, asking who that woman was. She pointed a trembling finger at Sarah, demanding to know why a stranger was in her house wearing her husband's clothes. Madison looked shocked, her mouth hanging open. They had assumed I was pining away, sitting in the dark, waiting for the queen to return. They never calculated that the king would find a new queen. Sarah did not flinch. She took a sip of her coffee and looked down at Linda with a pity that cut deeper than hate. She introduced herself simply as Sarah. She told Linda that she needed to leave, as she was upsetting the peace. Her voice was steady, contrasting sharply with Linda's hysteria. Linda lost it. She started screaming that I was an adulterer. She shouted that I had replaced her, that I was breaking our vows. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I stepped between them, facing Linda. I lowered my voice to a dangerous whisper. I told her to look at me. I told her that my private investigator had already pulled the records from the hotel in South Beach. I said the name Trevor Hastings. Linda stopped screaming. The name hit her like a physical slap. I saw the air leave her lungs. I continued, listing the dates. I mentioned the $20,000 she had wired to his business account in April. I mentioned the cruise they took in June, paid for with the money I had saved for my retirement. I laid out the timeline of her betrayal with surgical precision. I told her I knew about the failed gym investment. I knew Trevor had dumped her 2 weeks ago when the money ran out. I knew she was not back because she loved me. She was back because she was homeless and broke. Madison looked at her mother, horror dawning on her face. Linda had obviously spun a very different story to the kids, a story about finding herself, not about funding a boy toy in Miami. The narrative was crumbling. But Linda was cornered, and a cornered animal bites. She straightened her spine, trying to salvage her dignity. She said that none of that mattered. She said that she was my wife, that we had 26 years of history, and that I could not just throw her away for some neighbor who meant nothing. She claimed that whatever I thought I had found with Sarah was just a rebound, a temporary fix for my loneliness. She looked at Sarah with pure venom and said that she would be gone in a month once I realized I still loved my wife. That is when Sarah placed a hand on her stomach. It was a subtle gesture, protective and instinctive. She looked at me, then at Linda. She delivered the second twist, the one that shattered the world. She told Linda that she was not going anywhere. She said that in 6 months, this house was going to need a nursery. The words hung in the air. Pregnant. I saw Madison's hands fly to her mouth. She was looking at Sarah's stomach, then at me. I was 50 years old, and I was starting over. I was building a new family. Linda looked like someone had pulled the plug on her life support. She staggered back a step, gripping the door of her Mercedes. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She was not fighting for a husband anymore. She was fighting a ghost. I had moved on in the most permanent way possible. I took a step toward them. I told them to get in the car. I told the movers to close the ramp. I said that my lawyer would be in touch regarding the divorce proceedings and that I would be seeking full repayment of the $80,000 plus legal fees. I told Madison that I was disappointed, but that she was an adult and had made her choice. Linda tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked at the house she had decorated, the house she had abandoned, and realized it was a fortress she could not breach. She got into the car, her movements stiff and elderly. Madison followed, crying silently now. The movers slammed the back of the truck shut, looking relieved to be leaving. As they drove away, I did not feel triumph. I felt a cold, hard clarity. The past was not just dead, it was buried. But I knew Linda. I knew that the shock would wear off and be replaced by desperation. She was broke. She was humiliated. And now she knew she was being replaced by a younger woman carrying my child. She would not just go away. She would come back, and next time, she would not bring a moving truck. She would bring a war. I turned to Sarah, who was still standing on the porch, her hand resting on our future. I walked up the steps and told her to call the lawyer. We needed to file the restraining order today. The fight was far from over. The silence following the driveway confrontation was not peace. It was the deep breath before the plunge. I knew Linda well enough to know she did not retreat. She only reloaded. Sarah and I spent the next 48 hours fortifying our position. We filed for an emergency restraining order, citing the harassment and the unauthorized attempt to enter the property. The judge granted it temporarily, But a piece of paper does not stop a woman who feels entitled to half a kingdom she tried to burn down. I upgraded the security at the detailing centers as well, sensing that the war was about to spill over from my home to my livelihood. I was right. On Monday morning, I walked into my main office to find my operations manager looking pale. He told me the company credit cards had been declined at the supply depot. I logged into the business accounts and saw the damage. They were frozen. Linda's attorney, a notorious shark named Richard Paulson who specialized in bleeding business owners dry, had filed an emergency motion claiming I was dissipating marital assets. He argued that my spending on the mistress, his words in the legal brief, was draining the estate. It was a lie, but it was a lie that worked long enough to choke off my cash flow. I had 25 employees expecting payroll on Friday. I had vendors expecting payments for chemicals and equipment. Linda knew exactly where to hit me. She was not just trying to get a settlement. She was trying to strangle the business so I would be forced to capitulate just to keep the lights on. I did not panic. I opened the floor safe in my office, where I kept a cash reserve for emergencies, literal natural disasters, or economic crashes. This was a disaster of a different sort. I paid the most critical vendors in cash and told my manager to prepare manual checks for payroll. I was not going to let her starve my team to get to me. That night, the war came to my doorstep in a way I had not anticipated. My security app pinged at 2 in the morning. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the nightstand, leaving Sarah sleeping, and checked the feed on my phone. The motion sensor had tripped at the rear of the garage. On the grainy black and white screen, I saw a figure in a hoodie trying to pry open the side door with a crowbar. It wasn't a professional thief. The movements were clumsy, desperate. I did not call the police immediately. I went downstairs, disarmed the alarm silently, and waited by the interior door. When the wood splintered and the door swung open, I flipped the light switch. The intruder froze. It was my son, Tyler. He looked like a deer in the headlights, holding a crowbar in one hand and a backpack in the other. I did not yell. I just stared at him. The betrayal was so absolute it felt like a physical weight in my chest. He wasn't there to steal tools. He was there to steal documents. Linda had sent him to find the hidden assets she was convinced I had, or perhaps to plant something to incriminate me. My own son, breaking into my home in the middle of the night to do his mother's dirty work. I took the crowbar from his hand. He did not resist. I opened his backpack and found a list of specific files he was looking for: tax returns from 5 years ago, property deeds, and safe combinations. It was a shopping list written in Linda's handwriting. I told Tyler to sit down. I asked him if this was what he wanted his life to be. A felon committing burglary for a woman who would throw him under the bus the moment it became convenient. He started crying, the blustering anger from the driveway gone. He admitted that Linda had promised him a cut of the settlement, that he was in debt from gambling, and that she was his only way out. That was the first twist. My son wasn't just a loyal soldier. He was a mercenary. Linda was buying his loyalty with money she didn't even have yet. I looked at him and realized I had a choice. I could call the cops and ruin his life, or I could use this. I told him to get out. I told him that if he ever stepped foot on my property again, I would hand the security footage to the district attorney. He fled into the night, but the damage was done. The family was not just broken, it was at war with itself. The next morning, I met with my lawyer and the private investigator, eager to strike back. I handed over the security footage of Tyler, not to file charges yet, but to keep as leverage. If Linda tried to claim she was a fit parent or a victim, I had proof she solicited her son to commit a felony. But the investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Miller, had something bigger. He slid a thick file across the mahogany table. He told me to look at the timeline of the bank withdrawals again. I looked. The $80,000 was there, the dates matching her disappearance. But Miller pointed to a document I hadn't seen before. It was a loan agreement from a secondary lender, a high-risk firm that operated in the gray areas of finance. 6 months before she left, Linda had taken out a second mortgage on her home. The amount was staggering, $200,000. I stared at the paper. My signature was at the bottom. It was a good forgery, but it was a forgery. I had never signed this. I had never even met with a notary. Miller explained the scheme. Linda hadn't just left on a whim. She had been planning this exit for half a year. She forged my signature, had a crooked notary, likely a friend from her real estate circle, stamp it, and funneled the cash into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The $80,000 from the savings account was just the tip of the iceberg. She had stolen nearly $250,000 of equity from under my nose before she even packed a bag. But here was the second twist, the one that changed the entire landscape of the battle. Miller turned the page to reveal a demand letter from that same lender. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The loan was in default. They were preparing to foreclose on my house. Linda hadn't paid a dime on the note since she left. She had taken the cash and run, leaving the debt anchored to the property I was living in. The reason she came back wasn't just because she was broke. It was because the lender was hunting her down, and she needed to sell the house to pay them off before they pressed criminal charges for fraud against her. She wasn't trying to reconcile. She was trying to liquidate the evidence. She needed to get back into the house, establish residency, and force a sale to cover her tracks before I found out about the forgery. If the house was sold as part of a divorce settlement, the loan would be paid off from the proceeds, and her crime would be buried in the paperwork. She was trying to get me to pay off the debt she incurred to cheat on me. Rage is a hot emotion, but what I felt was ice cold. I looked at my lawyer and told him to file the fraud charges. I told him to contact the lender and report the identity theft. I was done protecting the mother of my children. She had risked my home, my business, and my future to fund her affair. I went home to Sarah and told her everything. She sat in silence, processing the magnitude of the deceit. Then she asked the question that had been gnawing at me. She asked what would happen when the police went to arrest Linda. I told her the truth. Linda would not go down without trying to burn the world. And I was right. 2 hours later, my phone exploded with notifications. Linda had gone nuclear. She had posted a video on social media, sobbing, with a bruised cheek and a split lip. She claimed I had beaten her. She claimed that was why she left a year ago, fleeing for her life. She claimed I was an abuser who had brainwashed her children and was now using my financial power to silence her. The video was going viral locally. My business page was already getting flooded with one-star reviews calling me a monster. She had staged an assault. She was framing me for domestic violence to get an emergency protective order that would kick me out of my own house, the house she needed to sell. She was gambling everything on the court of public opinion because she knew she had lost in the court of law. I stared at the video, watching the woman I once loved lie with a conviction that was terrifying. She had no idea that the security cameras in my driveway had audio, and they had recorded our entire interaction perfectly. She had no idea that I had proof she left my property without a scratch on her. She had played her final card, and it was a bluff I was about to call with the force of a freight train. The fallout from Linda's video was instantaneous and radioactive. Within 3 hours of her posting that tearful, fabricated confession, my world began to disintegrate. My phone did not stop buzzing with notifications from social media, hate mail from strangers, and cancellations from longtime clients who believed the performance of a desperate woman over years of my professional integrity. I watched the star rating of my business plummet from a perfect 5 to a dismal 2 as an internet mob, fueled by a lie, decided I was a monster who beat his wife. The comment sections were filled with calls to boycott my shops and demands for my arrest. It was a digital lynching, efficient and brutal. I stood in my living room, watching the blue and red lights of a police cruiser wash over the walls. I had expected them. Linda had filed a formal report immediately after posting the video, claiming imminent danger to secure an emergency protective order. This was her Hail Mary, a tactical nuclear strike designed to remove me from the house so she could take possession, sell it to the loan sharks she had defrauded, and disappear before the ink dried. I instructed Sarah to stay upstairs in the bedroom and lock the door. This was a confrontation I needed to handle alone. When I opened the door, 2 officers were standing there, hands resting near their holsters. They looked tense, expecting a violent abuser. They told me there had been a report of domestic battery and that they needed to speak with me. I did not argue, I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not resist. I stepped aside and invited them in. I told them that I was aware of the allegations and that I had been expecting them. I led them to the living room where I had the large television screen paused on a specific frame of video. I played the footage for them. It was the recording from the driveway camera, time-stamped exactly 48 hours ago. The high-definition video clearly showed Linda leaving my property. It showed her yelling, it showed her walking to her car, and most importantly, it showed her face. It was spotless. There was no bruise, no split lip, no swelling. I zoomed in on the frame, where she turned to scream one last insult. Her skin was flawless. I then pulled up the timestamp of her social media post and the police report she filed, both dated 2 days later. I explained that she had left my property unharmed and that whatever injuries she currently sported were sustained long after she drove away from my house. The officers watched the footage 3 times. The tension in the room shifted from accusation to confusion. The evidence was irrefutable. I handed them a flash drive containing the video file and a copy of the private investigator's report regarding the fraud and the forged mortgage. I told them that my ex-wife was not a victim of domestic violence. She was a perpetrator of grand larceny and fraud who was attempting to weaponize the police force to cover her tracks. They took the evidence, their demeanor changing completely. They told me they would need to interview her again and that, for now, I was not under arrest. They left, but I knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The next morning, the first twist revealed itself, and it was darker than I had imagined. My private investigator, Miller, called me with the background check on the secondary lender Linda had used to take out the fraudulent mortgage. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't even a legitimate subprime lender. It was a shell company fronting for an organized crime syndicate operating out of Chicago. Linda hadn't just borrowed money. She had taken $200,000 from loan sharks to fund her affair in Miami. Miller told me that the bruise on her face in the video was likely real. She hadn't applied makeup. She had been given a warning. She was late on her payments, and these were not the kind of people who sent sternly written letters. They sent enforcers. The realization hit me like a hammer. Linda wasn't just trying to steal the house out of greed. She was trying to liquidate it because she was terrified. She had framed me for the beating she received from her creditors, hoping to use the sympathy and the legal eviction to get quick access to the property's equity. She was trapped between a prison sentence for fraud and a violent end at the hands of the mob. She had tried to sacrifice me to save herself. I was still processing this when my back door opened. I grabbed the baseball bat, my nerves frayed, but it was Madison. My daughter looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, and she was shaking. She collapsed onto a kitchen chair and buried her face in her hands. She told me she couldn't do it anymore. She confessed that she had been with Linda when the video was recorded. She confirmed that Linda had come home with the bruise 2 nights ago, terrified, refusing to say who did it. Madison admitted that Linda had forced her to hold the phone while she recorded the lies about me, threatening that if Madison didn't help, the bad men would come back for all of them. This was the second twist. My children were hostages in her scheme. Linda had terrified Madison into compliance by using the threat of the loan sharks against the entire family. Madison told me that Linda was currently hiding in a motel on the edge of town, waiting for the police to kick me out so she could move back in and list the house immediately. She handed me her phone, which contained text messages from Linda detailing the plan to sell the house for cash to a quick-buy investor by the end of the week. I looked at my daughter and saw the victim she truly was. I told her that she was safe here, that I would not let anyone hurt her. Then, I went on the offensive. I did not just want legal exoneration. I wanted total destruction of the lie. I sent the driveway footage to every local news outlet that had run the story. I posted it on my business page with a caption explaining the fraud and the extortion attempt. I included the timeline proving she left my house unharmed. The internet is a fickle beast. As quickly as it had turned on me, it turned on her. The video of her leaving untouched, contrasted with her tearful accusations days later, went viral instantly. The narrative shattered. The comments shifted from calling for my head to calling for her arrest. My business phone started ringing again, this time with apologies and people offering support. I had cleared my name in the court of public opinion, but the danger was now physical. Miller called me back with urgent news. The police had issued a warrant for Linda's arrest for filing a false police report, fraud, and identity theft. They had raided the motel Madison mentioned, but Linda was gone. She had fled, but Miller had a lead. He had tracked her phone's GPS signal. She wasn't running out of state. She was heading here. I realized with a jolt of adrenaline that she had no other options. She couldn't go to the police because she was wanted. She couldn't go to the loan sharks because she didn't have the money. She was coming to the only place she had left, the place she felt entitled to, the place where she thought she could find the hidden cash or the deed she needed. She was coming to my house, and she was desperate enough to do anything. I told Sarah and Madison to go into the basement and lock the heavy steel door. I called the police and told them the fugitive was en route to my location. Then I sat in the dark of my living room, watching the security monitors. The war was ending tonight. Linda was coming to claim what she thought was hers, but she was walking into a trap set by the man she had underestimated for 26 years. I watched the headlights of her silver Mercedes sweep across the front lawn, cutting through the darkness. She killed the engine but didn't get out immediately. I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat, hunched over, likely building the courage for one final, fatal mistake. I waited, the silence of the house amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat. She was not a wife, a mother, or a partner anymore. She was just a threat, and I was the wall she was about to crash against. She didn't knock. I watched on the monitor as she moved around the side of the house to the patio doors, the ones hidden from the street by the high privacy fence. She picked up a heavy decorative stone from the garden, a stone we had picked out together on a vacation in Wisconsin 5 years ago, and smashed the glass. The sound was dull and heavy, swallowed by the insulation of the house, but on the audio feed, it sounded like a gunshot. She reached through the jagged hole, unlocked the latch, and slid the door open. Linda was inside. I stayed in the armchair in the living room, listening to the frantic rhythm of her footsteps. She didn't call out my name. She didn't look for me. She went straight for my home office. I watched her on the interior camera feed. She looked like a wild animal. Her designer clothes were torn, her hair was matted, and the bruise on her cheek had bloomed into a dark purple welt. She fell to her knees beside the desk and ripped up the rug, exposing the floor safe. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely dial the combination. She tried once, failed. Tried again, failed. She didn't know I had changed the combination the day I discovered the missing $80,000. I stood up and walked down the hallway. I didn't rush. I wanted her to feel the presence of the man she had betrayed. I stepped into the doorway of the office and flipped the light switch. The sudden brightness made her flinch violently. She spun around, clutching a brass letter opener she had grabbed from the desk. For a second, I saw the woman I had married 26 years ago, but then the image fractured, replaced by the desperate criminal crouching on my floor. She opened her mouth to scream, to beg, or to threaten, but no sound came out. She saw the look on my face. It wasn't anger. It was total, final indifference. I didn't say a word. I simply pointed to the window behind her. Blue and red lights erupted through the darkness, washing the room in a chaotic strobe. I had called the police the moment her car entered the driveway, and they had approached silently, surrounding the perimeter. The front door burst open, and 3 officers stormed in, weapons drawn. They ordered her to drop the weapon. The letter opener clattered to the hardwood floor. Linda collapsed. She didn't fight. She just crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, sobbing into her hands as the officers pulled her up and cuffed her wrists behind her back. As they marched her out past me, she looked up. Her eyes were searching for some shred of mercy, some remnant of the husband who used to fix her problems. I looked right through her. I watched them load her into the back of the cruiser, the same way one watches the trash collector take away the refuse on a Tuesday morning. It was necessary, it was ugly, but once it was done, the house felt cleaner. The legal aftermath was swift and brutal. My lawyer, energized by the mountain of evidence we had collected, went for the jugular. Linda was charged with breaking and entering, grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, and filing a false police report. Because the lender she had defrauded was connected to organized crime, the federal authorities got involved as well. They offered her a plea deal in exchange for testimony against the loan sharks, but it still came with a heavy price. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The woman who wanted to find herself found herself in a 6x8 cell in a minimum security facility in West Virginia. The civil case was equally decisive. The judge granted me a full divorce on the grounds of adultery and criminal misconduct. Because of her fraud, the court invalidated her claim to any marital assets. The forged mortgage was a mess, but with the police report and the fraud conviction, my insurance and the title company absorbed the loss. I kept the house. I kept the business. I kept my retirement. Linda left the marriage with $0 and a prison record. My children faced their own reckonings. Tyler, my son, was indicted as an accessory for the break-in. I could have intervened, but I chose not to. He needed to learn that loyalty to a toxic parent does not exempt you from the law. He received 3 years of probation and was court-ordered to attend gambling addiction therapy. I paid for his rehab, but I cut him out of the will and the business. He works now as a mechanic in a different state, and we speak once a year on Christmas. It is a cold relationship, but it is the one he earned. Madison was different. She had been a pawn, terrified, and manipulated. After the arrest, she broke down and apologized, really apologized. She spent months in therapy deprogramming the guilt her mother had installed in her. She moved into the guest room for a while, helping Sarah around the house as the pregnancy progressed. She learned that family isn't about blind obedience. It is about mutual respect. She is slowly earning back my trust, day by day. 6 months after the arrest, on a rainy April morning, my life truly began again. Sarah went into labor. I held her hand in the delivery room, watching the woman who had saved me bring new life into the world. When the doctor handed me my daughter, Emily, I felt a surge of emotion that washed away the last lingering bitterness of the past year. Looking at her face, I realized that Linda's betrayal was not a tragedy. It was a catalyst. If she hadn't left, if she hadn't stolen the money, if she hadn't burned our life to the ground, I never would have met Sarah. I never would have held this baby. I would still be the boring, reliable rock for a woman who secretly despised me. Today, the business is thriving. We opened a 6th location last month. The house has been remodeled. The nursery is painted a soft yellow, and the kitchen smells like Sarah's cooking, not cold silence. I still drive by the prison sometimes when I have business out east, not to visit, but just to remember. I remember that the man I used to be is dead, buried under the weight of lies and theft. The man I am now is stronger, wiser, and happier than I ever thought possible. Linda wanted freedom. She wanted excitement. She got exactly what she deserved. And I got exactly what I earned. A life built on truth, a woman who loves me for who I am, and a future that is bright, loud, and full of love. The $80,000 was a steep price to pay for freedom, but looking at my wife and daughter laughing on the porch of the home I defended, I know it was worth every single cent. The best revenge wasn't sending her to prison. The best revenge was realizing I didn't need her to be happy. I had won the only game that mattered. I had survived, and I had thrived.